Okay, awesome, cool. Now we're ready to go. So tonight we have three amazing speakers. Micah is gonna kick us off with Beyond the Binary, followed by Regine talking about inclusive design for a digital world. And we will close it off with Dane Robertson talking about how to make diversity, inclusion, belonging a part of everything we do. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it off to Micah to get us started.
Thanks. I'll share my screen. Everyone see it okay? Great. So my name is Micah, and I'm a product designer at Asana here in New York. And I'm here to talk to you about some prior work that I did about designing for inclusive gender fields and how you can maybe implement that in your own designs. So as a first primer, for those that maybe aren't aware, one's gender identity, gender assigned at birth, and gender expression may not be one and the same. Rather, many people have an infinite variety of gendered experiences in the world. People have lived beyond the binary across civilizations and millennia, and the social construction of gender and sex is slowly becoming more and more widely accepted. However, today, somehow in 2020, almost every form field you'll ever encounter in every interaction still looks like this. How many of you have seen a field like this and grimaced? And that means that in our products, our transgender non-conforming users just don't exist. Across the US, more and more states are recognizing non-binary identities. And if our products don't as well, we'll be leaving out entire populations of people. So healthcare, as we all are pretty familiar, it just sucks. It's a dated industry filled with legacy systems and archaic technology. Oscar is a health insurance company that was founded to disrupt that history. In a former role as a senior product designer on their growth team, I set out to understand how we could best provide the best possible user experience for gender collection, particularly for our transgender non-conforming members. So these are some of those highlights and learnings to share with you today. Sorry. So first and foremost, I encourage everyone to ask yourself, do you need gender at all? So a general guiding principle for allies in the UX design field is that if gender is not intrinsic to your product, just don't use it. For instance, should a banking experience have anything to do with your gender? And including gender in a product can also lead to significant debt further down the line. This is something that Airbnb had to remediate after the fact. And not accounting for diversity in your product can also lead to disjointed user experiences, of which there are many memes like this one. And so when there really is no use for it, sometimes it's best to skip gender collection altogether, which is something that Snapchat has implemented. The second most important thing is to understand its impact on your users. So for some instances, say healthcare, gender is actually incredibly important to one's experience. A seemingly simple field can lead to frustrating experiences for transgender non-conforming people, but also have significant impacts on their health. So as we see here, transgender non-conforming folks are significantly disenfranchised from the healthcare industry and often avoid going to the doctor altogether, and for good reason, because they often are discriminated in those experiences. How can a doctor provide personalized care to transgender non-conforming individuals if they don't know the person's gender identity? And how can a healthcare company properly serve its members if their identity doesn't exist in their data? The lack of appropriate recognition of transgender non-conforming individuals within a healthcare has dramatic healthcare consequences. It leads to disenfranchisement within the healthcare system, resulting in negative health outcomes, and this is compounded by factors of race, immigration status, and class. When legally changing one's gender, the dreaded form field is compounded, where the name and gender on your identity card, your birth certificate, your prescriptions, doctor forms, and health insurance forms all have to be updated. This process is often bureaucratic and dehumanizing. If you're looking to follow, if you've been following the news these days, the current administration is trying to undermine the healthcare rights law, which is a life-saving law that helps transgendered people access the healthcare they need without discrimination from healthcare providers. This proposed legislation will introduce further confusion and friction for transgender nonconforming people. As the majority of gender fields remain stuck in the binary in our products and healthcare forms, there's an indication that the experiences of TGNC people have not been prioritized in our products and the services that we build. These are people, not edge cases. So for instance, hypothetically, if 10% of our 420,000 Oscar members are LGBTQ, that's 42,000 people who are currently experiencing friction every time they encounter binary gender fields. This kind of advocacy was really useful when working within my company to show that, while we may say in the data set that this is something like an edge case, it can actually lead to significant impacts. Lack of inclusivity in gender forms can also lead to inaccurate data, which has a significant impact on public health. The problem in the industry is industry-wide in healthcare, and carriers and insurance companies all use inconsistent and uncleared field labels. So you can see here, healthcare.gov uses sex, male, female, covered CA accounts for some trans identities, and Health Sherpa uses gender identity. At Oscar, when we would take all of these enrollments and process it in our database, things got awry. And this can actually lead to improper experiences in people's health. So gender can be interpreted as gender assigned at birth for population health interventions and risk models, or gender can be assumed to be the member's gender identity and pronouns when addressed by member support. And most of our products presume gender matches a person's legal sex or gender marker on identity documents. So when submitting insurance claims, things would also go awry. When these data points don't align, it introduces significant friction for users, and they often have to navigate all of this with uninformed and arduous channels to access just the basic care that cisgender patients have out the door. Step 3, validate your assumptions. So going into this, I found that some consumer-facing products have really done a really good job of bringing more inclusivity in their experiences. And some healthcare providers are starting to offer more and more inclusive forms to their patients. A leading pattern in the field is the 2-question method. It's a question that yields near 0 missing data and 2 times the transgender spectrum response rate. And it uses languages that are respectful to TGNC identities. To ensure we were providing the best user experience possible, we tested a variety of approaches with users. So on the left, the binary method, on the middle ground, gender, including non-binary as an option, the 2-question method, and a blank field. What we found in our study was that gender is, shocker, highly personal. Participants were excited to see more inclusive options, but many feared that that information would be used against them. In our interviews with transgender nonconforming individuals, percentages became real stories. So this participant said, I put male on my enrollment form, but my body is female. Doctors will presume I have a prostate, testicles. Will this affect the care I receive? I didn't want to put female either because that's also not true. You can imagine the difficulty of having to go through this crisis just when trying to fill out a basic form. What we found was that 2-question methods, similar to the leading use in healthcare, yield better data for our study as well. While it was vastly preferred by the majority of participants, though some gender assigned at birth was a new phrase for those outside the LGBT community, and it prompted some need for education. Also, we had way better data integrity results. With option A, the binary approach, 5 participants' sex did not match their gender identity assigned at birth. That means that those people have been completely missing from our data collection otherwise. And it also showed that sex is subject to multiple interpretations, and all of our existing data and how people are processing these things in healthcare and in your products may not actually be accurate. Step 4 is provide options, context, and transparency. So when soliciting feedback from experts in our field and our users, some best practices really kind of bubbled to the surface. First, inform users how their information will be used. So this is an opportunity to educate all of your users, TGNC and cisgendered alike, of what these terms mean and how they will be impacting them down the line. Multi-select dropdowns also allow for multiplicity and intersectionality, which is a better experience for all. And type aheads allow for infinite options while also retaining structured data. Other equals othering. So having that marker felt really strange for people, like, am I an other? And including the options up front and together was best received. Collecting additional gender options separate felt very othering, and likewise for users, like those ideas were the less than those that society would formally recognize. It's not an alternate address, it is who you are. And pronouns and names aren't preferences, they're inherent to one's identity. Lastly, advocate and iterate. So to move this work forward, because it was a passion project, we formed a task force of product design, engineering, legal, and ops. And we worked to engage key stakeholders across the entire company on why this work was important. It was resoundingly supported, but sometimes moments of education were needed, and sometimes you had to have a little bit of professional side eye. I further validated our recommendations with additional user testing, and it was significantly appreciated by both cisgender and TGNC participants. So one participant said, I appreciate that you value other genders. I would pick you over other companies because of that. And I'm very happy that we're being asked this at all. You will gender me correctly, not misgender me on the phone. And a trans female participant said, it makes me feel safe that they're going to understand what to do with my body. I'm telling you I'm trans, but do you know what that means? I don't want to have secrets with my health insurance. And health insurance gender touches almost every aspect of our user experience, from members' enrollment experiences and third-party data integrations. It will take at least a year to implement this across the Oscar product, and that work is ongoing since I've departed, as it's touched over 10 teams' roadmaps. But to us, it was immediately worthwhile once we heard this kind of resounding feedback from our members. I myself am not TGNC, but as a queer person and as a designer, it's my responsibility to think about the experiences of all of my users. And having TGNC colleagues I could collaborate with was incredibly important to the success of this work. And speaking to TGNC members at every step of the way was essential to our product development process. This work wouldn't have been possible without all of those who graciously shared their stories. Our products aren't perfect yet, but with the contributions of people like those in this room, we'll hopefully bring people out of the margins of edge cases and build products that truly serve us all. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Micah. Does anyone have any questions? Can type them in the chat, or if you're feeling brave, unmute and ask them.
Yeah, I want to ask something real quick. So are these slides going to be available after the meeting?
That's a great question. This is actually all in a Medium blog post that we could send a link out to. It's pretty much
Medium
right there without my voiceover, so it's even more helpful. And I'm happy to send that out.
No, the voiceover is great too because it gives a lot of context to the slides. Yeah. But yeah, that's something that's been on my mind a lot. I'm gonna be honest, guys, like trying to remember like being appropriate with pronouns and stuff has been the most difficult thing for me. Like I'm used to saying he, she, and using those pronouns. And, the more that I connect with people of different genders, non-binary, trans, and I try to be respectful, of them and not try to offend them. I think about the design too. I think about like, okay, how can I apply this now to the design and use the same language within the design so that people feel included and they don't feel left out, like even just like I have a tendency to say guys, hey guys, what's up guys? But that comes across to some people like that the wrong way, like not a guy, I'm a different gender, so yeah, I really appreciate this. This was on my mind, is what I'm saying.
Awesome. Yeah. There's a lot of links also in the blog post to guidelines and other resources. The number one thing I think with all of this, like I said, was speaking to actual folks themselves and reaching out to them directly. Because if you just tested this with a random pool of people, you wouldn't be able to pull this out.
Yeah, I was definitely curious about how you were able to get all that information too, and how you navigate asking about it when you're interviewing people, and just being careful not to really make somebody upset.
I think reaching out to your internal network, if you know anyone themselves, to like look over the questionnaire and ask is so forth. I was part of my Oscars ERG out at for LGBTQ folks, and so partnered with a lot of people there in the leadership team, and they often kind of volunteer to look over it. And I also know a number of people that are kind of advocates in the field. So just like if you were trying to design more accessible experiences, you would research experts to talk to. There's actually people out there that are happy to talk about how to make your products more inclusive for LGBTQ folks. And happy to introduce you to them if you like.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it. I do have somebody in mind that I could reach out to that I've been networking with for a long time, but I just get a little nervous sometimes because I feel like I have to walk on eggshells with people, and really I'm just a curious person trying to figure out how I can be not just a better person, but a better designer too, So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's great, Jonathan. Thanks for sharing that. Does anyone else have any questions? Cool. If not, without further ado, we have our second speaker, Regine. You can take over.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Regine Gilbert. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm happy to be here. I consider Brian a friend, so I'm really happy to be part of this group today. So I am going to be talking to you a little bit about inclusive design for a digital world. So let me go to share my screen. This is always like, is that the phrase for 2020? Can you see my screen? You're on mute. Okay, so.
Yep, it is.
Yeah, okay. Can you all see my screen? You can see my screen? Yes? Okay.
We can see your desktop.
Oh no,
and you.
Me and my background of me like practicing for, that's terrible.
There's a lot of files on there.
There are a lot of files on there. Oh dang, and this is on the record. Let me stop sharing. I thought I did the right thing, but I did not. Did I stop sharing? Yes.
Yes.
Here we go. Desktop 2. Share. Okay, now can you see my screen?
It's the same desktop.
Dang, what the heck?
It's all good.
Oh, okay. Let me just do this. Now?
There we go. Yes.
Oh my word. Okay.
Yay.
That was really challenging. Okay, so I am going to be using Google Slides. I like Google Slides because they have captions. Now, the captions are not perfect, but they're pretty good. And so if you are doing a presentation, it's helpful to have captions for people who may have English as a second language or other reasons. They may be in a loud space, their kids might be behind them, who knows. So I am actually the author of the book, Inclusive Design for a Digital World. I currently am an industry assistant professor at NYU, but I am a UX designer. And I've done a lot of e-commerce work, and I had my own consulting business for a few years where I worked with businesses big and small. And I'm going to talk to you today about accessibility and inclusion. This is from Topol. They say that accessibility design focuses on the outcome or end result of a design project. Inclusive design is closely related to accessibility, but rather than an outcome, it's a methodology for how to approach design. It's a process for creating a design that can be used by a diverse group of people. So I like to think of things like, who are you excluding from the start? One of my favorite books is Mismatched Design by Kat Holmes. Has anybody here read that book?
Yes.
No?
In our book club last summer.
Oh, cool. If you have not read it, I highly, highly recommend it. But Kat Holmes says that we don't really know what inclusion is. It's really hard to define, but we know what exclusion is. And actually, the start of my book, I asked the question, have you ever wanted to go somewhere and couldn't get in? And how did that make you feel? That's exclusion. That's what we do when we don't make things inclusive or accessible. And Kat Holmes says an exclusion habit is the belief that whoever starts the game also sets the rules of the game. We think we don't have power to change a game, so we abdicate our accountability. We keep repeating the same behaviors over and over. But the truth is, we as designers, everybody here has a choice. So 1 in 4 people in the United States has a disability. 1 in 4. I suspect with the pandemic and people's mental states and all kinds of things, the number will probably increase because people may not consider things like anxiety and depression, but that can make someone disabled as well. And in the year 2035, there will be more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 65. Meaning we're going to have a lot of people who are older who are going to have different needs. So what to keep in mind with accessibility specifically are visual, hearing, motor, and cognitive. So for visual, it's blindness, low vision, color blindness. For hearing, it's deafness and hard of hearing. For motor, it's an inability to use a mouse, slow response time, limited motor control. This is something for me that I experience because I've been playing a lot more video games and I have carpal tunnel in my right hand. And I am wishing that the Switch had some sort of better controller that could lay flat like the Xbox has. And there's cognitive learning disabilities, distractibility, inability to focus on large amounts of information. So there are these things called web standards, which I find a lot of designers don't even know these exist. But there are these international standards called the WCAG. I call them WCAG, but people say WCAG. They say all kinds of things. So the WCAG are part of guidelines published by the Web Accessibility Initiative and the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, the main international standard organization for the internet. And there's also Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act for the United States that requires federal agencies and their contractors to adhere to a minimum level of accessibility. So within the WCAG guidelines, there are 4 areas: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So perceivable refers to vision and hearing. So what are those things that you're creating? Are those perceivable for people with and without vision, with hearing and without hearing? Operable, can people operate things with their hands, without their hands? Cognition, are you making things clear? Is the language clear? And are things robust? Are they robust enough to use no matter where people are? So there's a wonderful, wonderful website called webaim.org. And WebAIM is really cool resource for digital accessibility. And in February 2019 and February 2020, WebAIM conducted an accessibility evaluation of homepages for the top 1 million websites and over 100,000 additional interior site pages. How many of those pages do you think might have been actually accessible? Any thoughts?
10%.
What's that?
10%.
10%? Yeah, not quite, not quite that high. So what they discovered that there were some, these were the main 6 issues that were found. Low contrast, which is design. Missing alternative text, not necessarily design, but that is something that design could have impact. Empty links, missing form labels, empty buttons, and missing document language. Now, the last 5 tend to be more, a little more on the development side, the front end side. However, these are things that could be questioned by designers, but the contrast thing is, you know, this is the main issue, right? When you look at this, which one is easy to read and which one is hard to read? You know, so I have here on the screen 4 boxes. The first box is blue with red letters that says this is hard to read. The next box to it is green with a lighter green that says this is easy to read. The next box is a neon green with a yellow text that says also hard to read. And then the last box here is a yellow background with black text that says also easy to read. So contrast is a major issue. So when we think about inclusion and equality, I have an illustration here and I will describe it. The first, there are 3 people who are trying to see a baseball game. In the first image, the 3 people, there's one who's tall, a middle height, and a shorter person. Each of the 3 people are standing on a box. The tallest person can see over the fence, so can the middle person, and the smaller person can see through a hole in the fence. This is equality. Equity is where the tall person can see over the fence without a box. The middle person is standing on 1 box, and the smaller person is standing on 2 boxes. This is equity. And when you completely remove the fence, this is liberation. This is what we have the ability to do when we make things inclusive and equal. So one of my friends hosts an amazing podcast called Revision Path, which showcases Black designers from all over the world. And he's been asking a question this year in 2020. And the question is, how are you using your skills to make a more equitable world? Now, I might not have gotten the question exactly right, but we all have this opportunity to use our skills to make things more equitable. And so how are we doing that? We may not be able to do that in our jobs, right? Because we have jobs to do and we have bosses and they want us to do things, but there are things that we could do within our own communities to bring forth more inclusion and equality. I also, listening to Revision Path made me rethink this and revise this, because if you don't start with strategy, there is no design. You have to start with a strategy, period. No matter if you're working in a big place or a small place, or you're working with clients, you have to have that strategy in order to know how to move forward. So I just wanted to address that, because I think strategy is design, and it is part of your job. You're not just like making, pushing pixels. You actually, there is a strategy to the things that you do. So there's some inclusive design tools that everybody can use. There's a Wave tool, it has a Chrome plugin, No Coffee, Axe. There's so many color contrast analyzers. Chrome accessibility developer tools, and some inclusive design tips. And I know this is a slide with lots of stuff on it, so I'm breaking my own rules here. But get to know who you're designing for. Make inclusive design a part of every stage of product development. Design for uncommon uses first. Design with clear affordances, and assure color contrast is clear enough for those with vision issues, including color blindness and low vision. And this is just a chart of how inclusion kind of works and the cross sections of it and what you get out of it. Improve user experience, provide safety and security, ensure equity in decision-making, foster and develop distributed leadership, invest in skill development, manage internal knowledge, coordinate across stakeholders, prioritize topics for impact, innovate in free knowledge, evaluate, iterate, and adapt. Sorry, this is in the way here, the thing. Plan infrastructure scalability and promote sustainability and resilience. So how might we make more inclusive and accessible experiences? I am a professor, so I always like to ask, you know, the question, and I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts just off the top of your head from anything that I might have presented.
Well, I actually have a question that kind of leads into that, dealing with the VR and AI portion of the industry and how you think it may change the way inclusivity may look, whether it'll bring more challenges or.
Yeah, so currently my research is looking at accessibility and software and tools with VR and AR. And so far, the tools themselves are not very accessible. So that says something. And if the tools themselves aren't accessible, then how are we making accessible things? So it has to start somewhere. And I think it starts with these companies because they're the ones that, you know, we make, you know, even if you, let's say, for example, over the summer, I had my students work on a project where they came up with a concept for an augmented reality experience for someone who's blind. They worked with this person. However, when it came to trying to, you know, prototype something, they were like, well, the tools aren't accessible, right? So you can't have someone who's blind use Figma because it's not a real website. You would actually have to build out something in order for it to be tested. So if the tools themselves aren't accessible, that's a problem. So I don't know if I answered your question, but we have to start somewhere. And I think it starts with understanding what we have and what we have to work with and how we can improve on those things.
Oh yeah, it answered my question. I was just definitely wondering, as like a semi-new technology and the way that the direction that we're going, since we're pretty much all on our computers now and kind of staying sheltered for the moment.
Yeah. Anyone else?
There's some really good ones in the chat, actually.
Oh, I can't see.
Yeah. I'll read some out. So Christopher Matthews says caption videos. Vanetta says super interested in VR and AR, and it's such an important consideration as regards to accessibility. Aaron says, I think that as designers, we can create more inclusive and accessible experiences in more legacy industries that are not tech, such as finance, energy, and insurance, etc. Christopher says, listening to communities that require accessibility instead of creating or designing for communities, and for is emphasized here. Aaron says there's also a big opportunity for improvement there since the systems and digital experiences are so outdated. So I apologize in advance if I mispronounce the name. Shriyash says designing with people and not for people. And
Yeah.
with and for are both emphasized. Yes. Oscar says those in leadership roles can become advocates. And yeah, I think that's really important. Lizzie says, I think a next step could also be considering how new designs for tangible products can interface with what is on the screen. For example, what is a quote unquote mouse, keyboard, etc. And Chelsea says, diversifying our design teams.
100%. Like, let's bring people with disabilities into design, right? And get, we need to definitely the design with, and not just like bring them, bring in people with disabilities at the end to test something. So yeah, we have a lot of opportunity. And I've been doing this workshop for the past year, Designing for Your Future Self, where I have people think about themselves as older people, like themselves, not like you're designing for someone else, like you with all your like beauty and faults. And if you're wearing glasses now, or if you're wearing headphones all the time, our hearing it diminishes as we age. Our sight diminishes as we age. If we're looking at screens all the time, if we're having headphones on all the time, is it speeding up that process? What does that mean? And just recently, I listened to a talk where this man, Claudio, said, when was the last time you saw a really beautiful or stylish and attractive walker? And, he spoke about our bias and the fact that a lot of things that are designed for people with disabilities are not attractive. And why aren't they? And what ends up happening is people with disabilities end up designing or redesigning them for themselves and make really cool things. So I think that we have an opportunity now to design for our future selves, to make things beautiful. They don't have to be ugly, so that's just something to consider. But I didn't have anything else. That was it. Thank you, everyone. That was fun.
Thank you, Regine. Does anyone have any questions? If you have questions, feel free to type them out into the chat, or if you are, if you would like, you can also unmute yourself and ask a question.
Okay, so I'll be brave again, right? So my question is, when you're kicking off a project, how do you get started with this when you kick off a new project? Because this is not something I've ever considered, when kicking off a project at all. And I feel really bad now because I'm leaving a lot of people out, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you are brand new to accessibility, get my book. I mean, I'll be honest, like, I think that
I'll grab the book.
Yeah.
Shameless plug. I'll grab it.
Yeah. I also have a Skillshare, like a 30-minute Skillshare on inclusive UX. But if you're just getting started, I would say, start to educate yourself on what does it mean? I don't know what you're working on specifically, but if you're working on web, one of the things I say, can you use the website using a keyboard only? Because not everybody uses a mouse. People who are blind and use a screen reader use a keyboard. There are people like developers use keyboard shortcuts all the time, right? So they're not even using the mouse. So can I only use a keyboard to navigate a site? For me, that is an instant, like, if I can't, your site's not accessible. That means you're excluding people.
So interesting. That's like kind of old school, where you just use the directional buttons on the keyboard to navigate. Man, I thought that was just like archaic.
No, people still do it. And people who use screen readers only use the keyboard. They don't use a mouse because they don't see the thing moving. So I would say just start to educate yourself on it. There's so many resources. I like WebAIM a lot. There's also DEQUE. university, they have different courses for accessibility. So if you're working on mobile or desktop, you can find out information there as well. Also, there's a company called Equal Entry, and they have a really great blog to check out. And if you're interested in accessibility and VR, there is a A11Y VR Meetup. A11Y is a numeronym for accessibility.
Oh yeah, I've been seeing that on Twitter a lot.
Yeah, so if you see A11Y, that's because there's 11 characters between the A and the Y.
Oh, okay. Wow. Never thought about that.
Yeah.
I always wondered what that meant. Cool.
Yeah.
Oh man. I thought people were just trying to spell ally with
It's
numbers.
also ally, but it's A11Y.
Okay.
So if you look up that hashtag, then you'll see a lot of accessibility stuff.
Yeah, thanks for sharing on the chat too. Thanks for giving me the floor. Appreciate you guys. Well, I shouldn't say you guys. I gotta stop saying that. Sorry about that.
We have a few more questions in the chat, so I'll just read them out in the order that they were received.
Okay.
Anna asks, what are your thoughts on making social media accessible for people with mental health disorders? Since the deliverables, for example, screen time, engagement, etc., are all what triggers these groups.
Okay, so that is a huge question, and it's such an individual question, and that would be like, that would boil down to the individual, you know, what are they engaging with? Is it Twitter? Is it Instagram? Is it Facebook? Like, each of those things is different, and how people engage with those things is different. And when you say, did you say mental?
So it was, the question was for designing accessible social media for people with mental health disorders.
Yeah, mental health disorders,
Yeah.
which it runs the gamut, right? So there's a lot of different areas in that. So I would need to know a little bit more in terms of what specific platforms you're looking at and what specific mental health issues you were aiming to target.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
This one is a little vague. So Sarah, if you can clarify perhaps, the general question is, can you talk about accessibility and education?
Oh, where do I begin?
Yes. Yeah.
So we're on a Zoom.
I'm the Sarah that did that question, so I could elaborate. I actually put in a few other ones also, so if you want to just do them all. But I was a special ed teacher, and I look like I have a sunshine in my head. So I have a lot of experience with the physical tools and the programs not meshing. And then I wrote later on about and then I said something about like design and how you sell so education is, and then about accessibility widgets. How do you feel about using those to compensate for core design? So those were my two, I guess, questions.
I mean, I don't think they're the best options because it's a supplemental, it's like a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, right? So there are deeper issues than that, and that's not really, it can help, but doesn't really help. So it's really, I'm a big fan of getting to root causes of things. And I think that if we can get an understanding of what's really needed, what do the students need, especially what do the teachers need, because I think they get left out of the equation in terms of like, they get thrown this task to do without the proper tools. You know, it's like, I want you to nail this into the wall, but you don't have a hammer. You have a piece of bread. So, you know, it can be really difficult. So no, I don't. I think that, again, getting to the root cause, really understanding what the needs are for the teacher, understanding what the needs are for the student, and then trying to meet those needs.
Do you know anyone or people who are researching, working on creating both like the physical tool that works with the digital tool? So students who have, let's say, cerebral palsy, but also have autism, and you're using a program, like how do you combine or design for those types of things?
So that's where universal design for learning comes into play, where there are different types of ways to learn for different types of learners. It is, so there is academic research around that. That's not my area of specialty, but I would look at, if you were interested, into universal design for learning and how universal design for learning is approaching accessibility.
Thank you.
Cool. Let's end off with one last question. So Lena asked in chat, in your opinion, how do you navigate deciding who owns certain parts of accessibility? And owns is in quotes here. Engineering or design. Example,
Everybody.
image text, keyboard interaction.
Everybody owns it, from marketing to development to whoever's working on SEO to design. It should never fall on design's shoulders solely. It should never fall on development shoulders solely. It is everyone's responsibility, but everybody needs to know their part, right? So there takes a certain amount of communication. I once worked in a place where I took it upon myself to create accessibility guidelines. I shared that with the visual designers, with the development team, with the copy team, with the marketers. I overstepped, but I didn't care, because it couldn't just be on me to do, you know? So if possible, letting everyone know their part is helpful, but it takes a certain level of education, right? And if it's not supported from higher management, it can be challenging to do, but you can still sneak it in, because I always did.
Great. Thank you, Regine.
Yeah, thank you.
If you have any questions, that's Regine's handle on the last slide for Twitter. Her information is also in the Meetup event page, so you can always go back to that and check it out. So thank you, Regine. That was an awesome talk, and everyone had.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
On LinkedIn or on Twitter. Thank you all.
Cool. Bye, Regine.
Bye.
All right. To close it off, we have Dane Robertson from Capital One talking about how to make diversity, inclusion and belonging a part of everything you do. So, Dane, you're up.
Thanks, Brian. I practice diversion a lot of times too, so don't worry about it. Hi, everyone. I'm Dane Robertson. I'm a senior design manager at Capital One. I'm going to be, to Brian's point, talking about building my experience in helping to build more diverse and inclusive design org. So let me get my screen set up. Forgive the noise in the background, that will happen. Got kids running around, so please forgive that. I'm also using, I also have to had a last minute change, so I have to use Adobe instead of Google Slides. All right, so first you are going to just see that screen, because Adobe makes this fun. Then I'm going to new share that. That should not. Does everybody see full screen mode?
Yes.
All right. So thank you. So yeah, once again, I'll be talking about building a diverse and inclusive design org. So I'm the type of person, I just like to get right into it. So first thing to start off is the why. Is like, what is going on today? Based on a design census done by AIGA, design is not what you would call a very inclusive industry or diverse industry. Like the Black and African American populations at 3%, Latinx population at 8%, which has remained unchanged for like 2 years. And this doesn't even account to Regine's point earlier. There's a lot of, by the way, there's going to be a lot of things that Regine said that I'm probably going to speak to as well. But this also doesn't account for people with disabilities who represent an even smaller percentage of the design population, even though the global population of people with disabilities is 15%. We're also in a world where psychological safety is something that's not being practiced in everywhere the way we would like to see it. So this is a article from the New York Times in which they did a little expose on Coinbase around the experience of Black workers and all of the frustration they went through, the racism and discrimination they went through. And this touched through all different facets of whether it was design, tech, or HR. If you haven't taken a look at it, this is something to definitely check out. But this is another example of the current state that we're in, that some of our populations, in this case, like our Black population, do not feel that they are working in environments where they are seen or heard or even wanted. And then there's what we produce from this environment. So Regine pointed to the lack of inclusion that exists on the web, especially. So this is an article from Wired around the internet, called "The Internet is for Everyone, right? But not with a screen reader." And this talks about people who are blind, who have been fighting for a more inclusive web for over 20 years, and how it's starting to result in lawsuits. We had a case of Domino's getting a lawsuit. Also, I remember Beyonce, she had a website and they had a lawsuit because their website wasn't accessible as well. So once again, like, people with disabilities make up a huge part of our population. The internet is only accessible, I believe only 70% of the internet is not accessible to people who are blind. And in that case, we're only talking about folks with vision disabilities. We haven't even talked about the hearing, the motor aspect. So we see how far that number starts to go down. So why does this matter? Well, when it comes to the businesses or companies that we're working at, diversity and inclusion is actually good business. This is a study from McKinsey, a comparative study from what they did in 2014 to 2017 that shows that gender and ethnic diversity are clearly correlated with profitability, but minorities still remain underrepresented. So in here, I know this chart can be sometimes a little harder to read, but they're saying that there is as of 2017, there is a 21% improvement in financial performance when there's more executive gender diversity. And then when there's that ethnic diversity, there's a 33% improvement in financial performance above that industry mean. And also, it's against the law to not design accessible sites. So that's also good business. Companies may want to save their money on lawsuits that may come up. And also, in the case of psychological safety, it leads to high performing teams. This is an article from Harvard Business Review, where they talked about Google's Project Aristotle program, which has become pretty famous for really highlighting the importance of psychological safety among other factors that lead to high performing teams, but they discovered that psychological safety is the number one factor. We need to have an environment where people feel safe to actually share or express their ideas and perform to the best of their abilities. So what do we do about that? I feel that to make a change, we need more than just inclusive design principles. That's one thing that I've heard more than anything. We're gonna make some inclusive design principles, which is great, wonderful. Microsoft has excellent inclusive design principles. But the same way we look at society from whether it's a racial lens or a lens of those who have disabilities, cultural lenses, it's the systems that are in place that create that exclusion. And that's what we really need to address to make something like inclusive design principles something that we can even act on in the first place. So we'll start stepping through some steps that we can start taking within our own companies to start making this something that our organizations see as important and that we can actually start impacting change. And this includes like some of my experiences at Capital One and previous companies that I've worked at. So number one is this is usually going to be a bottoms up approach. There are going to be some times where the person at the top is very passionate about diversity and inclusion and able to push that down. But we've seen through whether it's the data or actual reality that that's not usually the case. Passionate people are the key. So if you're passionate about this and want to make a change, find people in the organization who are passionate about the cause. And usually they will likely find you. An important aspect is turning that passion into a commitment. And then working together to spread awareness, support, and action through local grassroots initiatives. And at this point, it's helpful to try to involve some of the leaders or at least invite them to some of these initiatives so they can actually start seeing these things for themselves. One thing that I watch a lot of sports. So I was looking at First Take, which is on ESPN, and Stephen A. Smith made an interesting point about some of his interactions from like the circles that he's been around, and they were discussing race relations and why these things continue. And the point that these people made to him was that it was a conversation about Black people, and their comment was, Black people are very emotional and not very strategic, which means that if something happens, we will make noise, we will march, we will do everything, and then they can just sit back a while and just wait for the storm to calm down and it's all over. So this first step is about how do we turn that passion into more of a strategy and actually start taking action. Number two, elevate from that grassroots level to an org level. So begin influencing leaders to step up and be accountable. And this is a little hard because it begins with having those candid conversations with your leaders. And those conversations will be uncomfortable. But in those moments of uncomfort, remember the commitment. If your leader wants you to believe they care, challenge them to take action. A lot of times in my experience, when it comes to conversations around diversity and inclusion with leaders, their heart is probably there, which means their ego is probably there along with it at times. So I find that it really helps to really hold them accountable to the things that they're saying. Well, if you believe this is true, then why don't you help me out here? And if you're running into too much resistance with your leadership, then that is a red flag. You need to really question whether the company you're at cares about it, such as what happened at Coinbase. They lost, I believe, 2/3 of their Black employees because they figured that it's just toxic all over. Number 3, once you're able to establish that relationship with leadership, start working with them on a vision. Establish a vision rooted in diversity, inclusion, and equity. So imagine a future where work with your leadership to imagine a future where diversity, inclusion, and equity are seamlessly woven into all facets of the organization. The same way we would approach a destination state for a design problem. You begin socializing this vision with other leaders and the design org as a whole. And make it official. This can't be something that's just a one-time thing and you toss it and think you'll come back to it later. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of persistence to keep these efforts going. So it's always good to try to make these things official, make an announcement and put it out there and make people aware that this is happening. Number 4, once you have that vision, it's time to get specific and take action. So begin defining what diversity and inclusion looks like. So there's an example of how we defined it at Capital One, of having closed gaps in underrepresented groups at all levels. That diversity is actively encouraged and invested in. We're creating a psychological, safe environment where everyone feels they belong and are able to thrive. Everyone shows up for their peers through their daily interactions, and to consider the breadth of experiences and the solutions we make. And this is written in, and this is definitely in order of bringing folks in to create more diversity, creating that space where they feel comfortable. There's bringing folks into your organization, but there's also making them feel like they want to stay. And then there's those day-to-day interactions that impact a lot of our experiences in a company. And then how that comes down to what we actually make. And then come with a plan of action. It is going to take time and investment in a lot of areas. So this is an example of how we were able to structure some of our work at Capital One, where we started with creating a structure for diversity, inclusion, and belonging, a way of sustaining this for years to come. So in this effort, we were looking at what are our organizational principles, what are partnerships that we can start making, and even establishing a council that is focused on diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Shifting how people view DIB and learning and development. So this looks at training, communications. How do we talk about this? How do we work with vendors? How do we even evaluate vendors to help us level up ourselves in this area? Leadership engagement. So applying an inclusive and intersectional lens to leadership. The biggest, I see on LinkedIn a lot, I use LinkedIn a lot. I see on LinkedIn a lot that one of the biggest reasons for someone leaving a company is usually going to be their manager. So this is an area where we feel it's very important because it really impacts everyone's day-to-day. So a combination of certain workshops we can put together, actually having accountability for how our leaders show up and what happens when they don't show up. And then also sponsorship. How can we make how can we have more representation in our leadership through the use of sponsorship? How do we operationalize? So integrating these practices in all aspects of our work. So this is where inclusive principles come into play. But as you can see, that's just one piece of the puzzle that gets us to where we want to be. Norms and practices, our research guidelines. So even though we have inclusive principles on how we design, we also need to look at, well, how are we even learning? Making sure that we have diverse panels of people to talk to. And then how do we measure our experiences? How do we actually measure inclusion? That's something we've been looking at as well. And then the systems and processes. So applying an inclusive and fair lens to talent systems. So this is where we're looking at our hiring. What kind of job boards are we looking at? What kind of language are we using when we're creating job descriptions? increasing our digital presence at more schools and more diverse schools throughout the country, performance evaluations, and also pay reviews. And lastly, just do the work. Once again, it's all about accountability. An important facet of this is working with the design community on projects and initiatives. It can't be something that's just totally leadership driven. It takes a whole community to make this work. Recognize and reward the community for the work the same way we will reward any design work. This is just as important. And accountability includes a combination of reprimanding, training, or firing those who demonstrate behaviors counter to the vision. There is no point in putting together any type of principles, putting any type of ways of working if we're not going to hold people accountable to making this a reality. This is where I didn't create a thank you slide because I wanted this to be I wanted this to be what you took home right here, is the accountability aspect. That is the most important part of building a diverse and inclusive design organization. Thank you. Oh, Brian, can't hear you.
That's awkward. My microphone was hardware muted. But thank you, Dane, for all of that. I was just gonna ask the audience if they had any questions for Dane. They could type it in chat or unmute themselves. Also, Dane's contact information, his LinkedIn is in the event description. So if you want to get in touch with Dane, you can reach him through LinkedIn. So I see a few questions in chat, and I will ask them in the order they were received. So Abby says that I have experienced that holding leadership accountable is the toughest part of making real change. What types of accountability measures worked for you and the team at Capital One?
Yeah, that is a work in progress, not from a standpoint that no one's being held accountable, more so from a standpoint of actually like, how do we put these measures in place? So it's more of an ongoing thing. But what we are looking at with establishing our organization level principles is that those are going to create the foundation on top of which we that defines how we approach diversity and inclusion. And we're actually writing them in a way that we can begin to put some measurements around that, or how do we know that we're upholding these principles? And that's where that accountability aspect comes in. So whether it's accountability and what happens when it goes wrong, or the accountability aspect in how do we make sure that our leaders are showing up? We're also starting to look at that. How does that impact their performance review? How does that impact their expectation and their goals? That's the only way we're going to really make some progress around these areas is if we make it that serious.
Cool, thank you, Dane. The next question is from Alexandra. She says, love that foundation structure. How do you go assessing these areas in your org? Is there like a checklist that is referred back to or brought up every few months?
Yeah, so a lot of the outside of the principles that I already brought up, some of these aren't necessarily it is a combination of checking a box, and certain areas will be measured. So organizational principles, for instance, well, that's kind of checking the box. Yes, we did that, and we're measuring. It'll probably take a lot of other measurements to actually prove that we're being true to these principles. But when we're coming out and thinking about like our training, for instance, depending on the training, we're probably going to have different measurements around that. When we're looking at hiring, yeah, we do have metrics around that. that goes into like representation, what schools we're looking at. We're starting to be a little more intentional about evaluating the events so we've had like an Ignite event recently, and we opened that up to a lot more diverse schools. We included HBCUs, schools with larger Latinx populations. So that was just a couple last month. So now we were able to go back and look at that and say, okay, what do we do now? So that was more of an activation event. Now we're looking at, well, how do we build upon the activation? So if you think about brand, for instance, there's brand activation and then there's brand engagement. So we're looking at it the same way of, hey, was there a missed opportunity there where we just had this event, but we didn't really engage? How does this event start to manifest itself into folks showing interest into applying, actually going through the interview process? So those are some of the things that we're looking at, but there's no like one size fits all type of measurement there.
Cool, great, thank you. One last question in the chat from Randy. How would you measure the authenticity of the inclusion practices of an organization?
So that's more about like proof. The proof is in the pudding, right? So if it's authentic, if we have inclusive principles, for instance, well, we should have inclusive products out there. We should be doing we are showing that we're doing all it takes to create those experiences, whether it's through the way we research, the way we recruit panels for that research, how we're able to balance those considerations with everything else that we have to deal with in the org. So as designers, like, gonna have to work with product and engineering, and we're gonna have to have conversations about deadlines and feasibility and things like that. That's where it really starts to show up, is how is it getting balanced in all those priorities? Because once again, it gets to incentives. So sometimes our product partners are incentivized to get stuff out the door. Doing the right thing sometimes delays something from getting out the door. So that's where we really need to start challenging ourselves to show up there. And I think that's where you're going to measure that authenticity, essentially. And then the second piece is that, once again, is that accountability aspect. If you're hearing stories or you're experiencing like racism or any type of behaviors that are counter to what we say we believe, what happened to that person? Right? Is there something that was a little smaller, a little slip of the tongue? All right, little reprimand. Is it something egregious? Well, now we need to talk about, well, why is that person still here? Right? Right. You can train folks only so much, and then it gets to the question of, well, is this the right person anymore?
Yeah, those are all great points. Thank you, Dane. That was really an awesome talk. Does anyone have any more questions? Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question, or you can type it into chat and I can read it out loud. Give people a few seconds just in case they're typing, because I don't think Zoom has a typing indicator. But cool. Okay, well, I don't see any questions in the chat. So yeah, thank you, Dane. Thanks for spending your Wednesday evening here.
Yep, thanks so much for having me. If you want to connect, I'm on LinkedIn. Very easy to find me. I don't frequent other social media sites, so that's where I'm usually at.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Sounds good. Before we break, I'm just going to tell everyone we have our next meetup is on Wednesday, December 16th. we're going to be it's going to be a social event, just to kind of close off the years. So feel free to join us on Wednesday, December 16th for our Merry Mingles virtual holiday social. We'll be using a video conferencing site called Kumo Space, which allows for kind of like a spatialized video conferencing. So you get to like walk around a space to socialize with everyone. It's really fun. Details is in our Meetup page, and I will throw the link into chat so you can quickly access it. But thank you, everyone. Feel free to stick around. We'll hang out in chat on Zoom for until the event ends at 8:30. So yeah, thank you, everyone, for coming. And stop recording.